Welcome, my name is Rune Synnevåg and I'm VP of Technology here in Signicat. In this video, we're going to learn when to use the REST API and when to use our OIDC. We're going to look at how to authenticate with the REST API. And we're going to look into what parameters to use when creating an authentication session with the REST API. As mentioned, the authentication API can be used for both verification and authentication. With this API, you can verify the identity of a first-time user as well as authenticating returning users. So let's go into the differences between REST and the OpenID Connect. As you can see, there are two different integration paths into our authentication API. The first one is the REST API. That gives you flexibility, enables options like headless authentication and iframe, and also support for SDKs and native mobile experience. This API serves you best if you want to customize the entire flow and support advanced flows like iframe. If you want to use a more standardized method of connecting, you can use OpenID Connect. This is using an industry standard protocol and integrates towards most standard platforms and languages. We will first take a look at how to use our REST API. Then we will go into how to use our OpenID endpoint in the next video. Let's start at the flow using the authentication API. As you can see, we have the three parties here. We have the end user, the merchant site, and Signicat. In this case, the merchant site is the developer or the integrator. So it starts by the end user visiting your site. The end user needs to identify herself, so she clicks on Login. You create a session towards the Signicat Authentication API using REST or one of our SDKs. We will create a session on our side and return a session ID and a URL. Then you take that URL and forward it to the end user in an iframe or a redirect. The user navigates to the Signicat site, enters their credential in the IDP that is selected. Then they get a redirect or post message indicating the status. This status can be success, abort, or error. In the case of error, you will also get an error code in the URL. Then, you as a merchant call the Signicat Authentication API with a session ID from the first step. We will return the user identity with name, a national identifier, or date of birth. This depends on what data you required when starting the session. Then you as a merchant will need to store this on your side and log in the user. We start by creating an authentication session. You see here we need to do a post against this URL. But before we create a session, we need to understand what the different parameters in the session actually mean. So let's go through them one by one. We will start with allowed providers. Here you can set one or more IDPs that you want to use authenticating the user. You can choose between Norwegian Bank ID, Swedish Bank ID, and Danish NEM ID, Finnish Trust Network, or others. If you do not set a provider, all providers that are available on your account will be available. Next, you need to set the language. If you do not set the language, English is chosen. We currently support the Scandinavian languages and English. Other languages can be added upon request. The next is the required parameters. We need to set the flow. We support three flows for our authentication API. We support redirect, where the user is redirected after a complete flow. Iframe, where you embed the URL in an iframe on your page and use post messages to deliver the status. Or headless, where you create a flow and you poll for the result. You need to find out what type of flow to use. Read more about the different use cases on our developer page. The next parameter is include. This tells us what kind of data do you want to be included in response from the IDP. We have name, phone number, date of birth, NIN, and email. Some IDP do not return all of these data, so you need to look into our developer page per IDP in order to see what is supported. Name and date of birth are supported by most IDPs. Next thing you need to set is redirects. settings. You only use this on the redirect flow. If you do not use the redirect flow, you do not need to set this. If you set this, you need to set the success URL, the abort URL, or the error URL. These are the URLs that the user will be redirected to after the flow is completed. When using iframe, you need to set the iframe settings. This is the parent domain of the page that is running the process, and also the page that will receive the post messages in JavaScript. External references is used for your reference. This is a random string that you send along from your side. This is used for uniquely identifying this session at your end, and also is included in the billing reports that you get from Signicat. You can also customize the UI, and this is especially helpful when using iframe. You can hide the provider header, you can hide the footer, you can set theme mode to light or dark, or you can add a color theme. Pre-fill input is when you need to pre-fill input from your side. You can pre-fill the national identifier number, phone number, date of birth, or username. These are especially useful if you're going to use the headless flow. So when you do all this, you're ready to send the request. The return of the request will be a response. In this response, you also will get an ID and a URL. We will use this ID to get the session in the next step. So let's look at retrieve the session. Here's the URL you need to retrieve the session. It's the same as when you use the post, you just have to add the ID from the previous step. We will get the response, and we will go through the response attributes one by one. You have the ID, you have the URL, you have a security reference. This is only used when having the headless flow. Then you have the status. When you have created a flow, you have the status created. When the user have hit the URL, you have user initiated. If the user aborts, you get an abort status. If the user do not do anything and it goes over the time limit, it's timed out. You can also invalidate it using the invalid session endpoint to counter replay attack. If it somewhat fails for some reason, you get the failed status, but most usually you get the success status. That means that the user has successfully logged in or identified themselves using one of the IDPs. The created is just a timestamp when the session was created. And the expires tells you when the session will expire. After the session expires, you will not be able to get all the data back from our API. The provider tells you what kind of IDP the user used to authenticate themselves. Identity. This is the object that is added after the user have identified themselves. This is only available if the session has status success. Here you will always get a provider ID. This is the unique ID from the identity provider. This is the ID that you need to store in your database if you want the user to log in as the same user the next time he or she returns to your site. Depending on what you select and include, you will get full name, first name, middle name, last name, date of birth, national identifier number, phone number, or email. All of these will be retrieved from the IDP if you select them in the include, or if the IDP support them. An additional property you also get is the environment. This will send the user agent and the IP address of the user, and you can use this against the data on your side to check for extra security attributes. Allowed providers is just what you sent in to start the flow. If you have an error, you can see error details, error code, and message here. You can also get an audit trail that lists all the events in the user session, and you could put this in your database to show that an authentication session actually happened. So, with all this information, you now know how to create a session and how to get the user data afterwards. Now we have looked at the REST endpoint and how to use the authentication API. If you have any questions or comments, please go to our community or write them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.